Yeah, better. I just have to like swallow the food.
Yeah.
So I am Abby. You can call me Abs. You guys call me Abs. I write YA urban fantasy. Started writing YA urban fantasy, and then, as Martha was saying, I work in the Oresterin universe with all those wonderful people writing urban fantasy. And
no, it's fantasy.
It's fantasy.
yeah, okay, it's fantasy. It's not so less urban. I wanted to get a better idea of just who's in the room, so I wanted to ask a couple of questions. How many of you are dog people? Oh, lots. Okay. How many of you are cat people?
Wow. Are y'all insane?
How many are both? Like his fur and four-legged, you love it. Okay. How many of you, after spending all day at a conference, like talking with people and interacting with people, get home and kind of want to crawl under the covers and recharge your battery? Okay, probably more than half. How many of you, at the end of a long day of talking with people, are more energized? We are extroverts. Okay, I'm a like textbook introvert. I always thought a lot of writers were introverts, but actually I'm learning that there's a pretty solid mix. And oh yes, how many of you wake up in the middle of the night with numb hands or arms? Wow.
There are more hands up than extroverts.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later. So the title is obviously 40 Days to Four Figures, but what I just to set the expectation, I'm going to start at the 30,000 foot level and then drill down to what happened in those 40 days and how I got the results that I got. Because I surprised even myself. And it's never just what happened in those 40 days, it's what happened in the year leading up to, and mentality and mindset and all that. So I'm a Canadian. I lived on the west side of Canada in the Rockies. Has anyone been to Canmore, Banff area? Some people, yeah, really beautiful, like wilderness area. Worked for a wonderful company who made 100% natural bath and body products, and I worked in marketing, so I had the marketing background, and I worked with these people for 8 years. And if you'd asked me at the beginning of that 8-year stint with this company, if I ever would have started my own business, I would have said, no, forget it. Way too risky, too many businesses fail, don't have the stomach for it, don't know what I don't know, scared, all of those things. By the time I got to the end of that 8-year period, I was like, I want to start my own business. I just don't know what. And on the other side of things, I was always a lover of storytelling, loved stories and wanted to be a writer, had this dream, but I had that old mindset, the mindset that is now like 3 years old, 4 years old, 10 years old, I don't know, that traditional publishing is the only way to go. And if you don't go through the gatekeepers, you're not good enough, like all that bullshit. And I had to change that mindset and realize that you don't need a traditional publisher. You don't need to go through the gatekeepers. Now, with the way things have changed, you can kind of take the bull by the horns and do this on your own. But it took me a long time to get to that mindset. And at the okay, I'm going to get a little bit personal because I can't really tell this story without getting personal. I fell for an Italian guy who I was living in Calgary, so an hour away from Canmore, and was living there for 3 years, was ready to settle in Canada, loved Canada. We started seeing each other. It was going really well. We took a trip to Italy. He had to stay in Italy for an extra 2 weeks when I came home. And I got a phone call the day after I arrived home, and he said, I just lost my job in Canada. I can't even come home to pack up my apartment. They're moving me to, they basically said, you either quit or you take this job in Venice. And this was because the price of the barrel of oil had plummeted, and he worked for oil and gas. So I get this call from him, and he's like, I can't come home. I don't know what to do. And so I was at a it was a very difficult position I was in, because on one side I had a great job, it paid really well, had a great network of people, friends, lived in a beautiful place, didn't really want to change anything, but also I had this urge inside me to start my own thing and not really knowing what that was. And he's moving to Venice, not Winnipeg, so it was like, wow. So I took the plunge and I quit a very secure job, and I took 2 freelance roles. This all happened in the span of a few weeks. No plans to leave my job at all. All of a sudden, I'm moving to Venice. So I took these 2 freelance roles, and they were copywriting and marketing and consulting and that kind of thing. Not knowing that indie publishing was a thing at this time. So I moved to Venice, don't know anybody, don't speak the language. The only job I could get there is teaching English, and I didn't want to do that because I'm introverted and spending all day, every day in the classroom. I could do it one-on-one, but doing it with lots of people, if you're anything like me, it's exhausting. I have so much respect for teachers. So I took these roles and was working sort of part-time, and in the meantime, with the rest of my time, I was listening to podcasts, and I stumbled across Pat Flynn's Smart Passive Income podcast. Do you guys know it? Mm-hmm. So if you haven't discovered it, it's great. And through that, I somehow stumbled across Michael Angelou's story. And I was listening to him talk about what happened with his, with Deaf Becomes Her and the whole series and how he did it. And I was just blown away, absolutely blown away. And it was basically a 5-minute transition from, I don't know what I'm going to do, to this is what I'm doing. It was immediate commitment. And I thought, you know, I've always wanted to tell stories. I believe that I can do it. And I have the marketing side. So even though it's a different industry, there's some crossover there. So would you mind changing the slide to the next one? This is just a beautiful photo, sorry, because I didn't want to have words up here all the time while I was telling my story. This is basically what my first year looked like. So I'm a rookie author. I've only been publishing for about 14 months. From the first day I hit publish to now, it's about 14 months. But for a year before that, this is what I was doing. The relationship with the Italian fellow didn't work out. But you know what? It was the best thing that ever happened to me because he was a catalyst for how my life went after that. So there I am. I'm like, well, I'm not going to marry this fellow. We're still friends, which is great. But I had this dream of being a writer. I want to start this business. My freelance positions were expiring, and I had the choice to renew or not. I decided not to renew. I did not have a lot of money in the bank. So this was a major risk that I was taking, but I have no kids. I don't even have a dog. I don't even have a plant. Like I don't have to anything alive. So I made it in Italy, and I'm not going to stay living in the apartment with this guy. So I'm like, what do I do? If I go back to Canada, I know that I won't be able to stomach the insecurity, the lack of funds coming in. I'm going to get a job. And so I spoke with a friend of mine, and she's like, well, what do you know, why don't you just come up north to Trentino, where she lives, and she had 2 apartments upstairs on her villa. And she said, why don't you just move into one of my apartments and write your books? All right, so can't say no to that. So this is from her apartment overlooking Val di Sole in Italy, and this was my first year. It was just figuring out my process. And let me tell you, my first book took me 9 months to write. And I pantsed it because I didn't know any better, any differently. And I have so much respect for people who can pants it all the way through. Like I think Stephen King's a pantser, incredible. But I learned through writing a couple of books back to back. First book took me 9 months. I pantsed it. Second book took me 6 months. I got in so much trouble with my plot that I was sitting there on the floor with all these bits and pieces of paper scattered everywhere around me, realizing that I need to have a plan. Third book took me 3 months. Fourth book took me 1 month. I can now write a book in a month, but I don't because my arms go numb at night. So I didn't publish anything. This year that I spent doing this in Italy, I spent very little money. I had a lot of confidence in what I was doing and very committed to what I wanted to do, but I also had this little voice saying, what if you only make 17 cents a day for the next 7 years? You just don't know what's going to happen. And if you want to go to the next slide. I'm a collector of witticisms and great phrases, like funny phrases and stuff. This is one thing that I latched onto when I was watching The Good Writer. Because that year, you're going to have a lot of people around you that have different attitudes towards what you're doing. You're going to notice very quickly those who believe in you and those who don't believe in you. And my advice is to spend more time with the people who believe in you and spend more time with people who are the way you would like to be, because you become like those you hang out with. And it became very clear in this year to me which of the people in my circle really truly believed in me. They were saying, don't get a job, just focus. We're here to support you. Keep going. It's going to work, even if it's hard, you know. And then there were the non-believers who really cared about me, but they didn't really believe in what I was doing or whatever it was they did believe in. They were saying, it's probably time for you to go get a job now. And I had tried to write while having a job, and it was way too intense. My days were too intense during the day. I'd come home, I'd try and write, and I was just exhausted. So I knew that it wasn't going to work. If I went to get a job, I would never finish what I started. So watch out for the true believers. Find those people and surround yourself with them. Hold them dear. Because without them, I would not have been as successful as I have been. So next slide. Oh yes, I wanted to talk about the power of brand. How many of you read this guy's books? Look really closely.
Yes.
See this? No. This guy knows the power of brand. And if you look at his Amazon page, he's still publishing. Originally he was Stephen King, and I think the real Stephen King got upset and told Amazon, and Amazon said we need to do something about this. So yeah, PR. His reviews are pretty bad because people are very disappointed when they realize that it's either that or they think the story is not as good as his normal stuff. So his reviews are terrible. They're between 1 and 3 stars, most of them. But he's still making good money. And he's still doing what he's doing because he understands the power of brand. So that font and style of cover speaks to you very clearly about Stephen King's brand. And if you don't look carefully, you can't even tell the difference. So next slide, please. Right away when I embarked on this adventure, I was taught to think of what I was doing as building a brand, not as just as writing books, and that's what you're doing too. And I want it to be a meaningful brand, and that takes time to build, but what is a meaningful brand? It's something that impacts our well-being, quality of life, individually and collectively. So think about what you're doing when you're telling your stories and what you're providing people with is such high quality. I have people write to me and say, thank you for writing this story. I'm going through a divorce. It made me feel so much better. This particular line spoke to me. I think sometimes as writers, we get lost in just the telling of the fable and the adventure and the action and the romance and all that. But you're really touching people with what you're doing. And every time you launch a book, and especially the first time, you're making a promise to your readers with that story, how it's told, what your voice is, the package. You're making a promise that you cannot break. And every time you launch another story, you are saying, I promise this will be as good as the first one, if not better. And that's what powerful brands do. And when you're telling your stories, I think it's important to remember that there needs to be consistency, and you need to think of it as a brand. There's you, the person, telling the story in the background, but then there's also the face of what you're presenting to your readers and how you do that. So you're engaging in ideas versus selling products. So what do you have to say as a writer? And it's very clear when you pick up Michael Anderle's book that what you're going to get. You're going to get hilarious cussing. You're going to get some death and possibly dismemberment. You're going to get some explosions. You're going to get some humor, lots of humor, very lighthearted. You're going to come out of it feeling better. You're not going to feel like you just watched a documentary. Life's a completely different promise than someone who produces documentaries, right? So, and they're not the fad, they're the future of responsible business, which is tying really nicely into Martha's talk about collaborative universes. Because I feel like this is sort of the direction that publishing is going. And we in this room are at the front of it. So yes, you're not only an author, you're a brand. What do you stand for? And I think it's important to consider that before you're launching and while you're developing your business. Next slide. Okay, so this is the series that I launched with. This is the book that took me 9 months to write. This is the one that took me 6, 3, 1. And it was really important to me that I have a series that has multiple entry points. And I think somebody was talking about that yesterday. I read it with my phone in the morning. So this series, that is a novella. And we'll talk about novellas in a sec because they're a really great thing, a great tool that can be used in multiple ways. This series has 5 entry points. You can start this series at any one of these books. And I think this is a critical reason for the performance that I had in the first 40 days, and also continuing over the year that I've been publishing. So how it works is the stories take place over the exact same summer. So you pick up this book or you pick up that book, it doesn't matter. They start at the same point in time. All these girls are friends. They know each other. They go to school together. And throughout these books, they're texting one another. So the reader understands that even though I'm reading this story, Targa's story, in first person, and it's her brain I'm in, and it's her experience I'm having, I understand that something is going on with Saxony, who went to Venice, with Georgina, who went to Ireland, with Akiko, who went to Japan. So that's what connected the stories, and the reader would get a little bit of an idea of who these other characters were, and who these girls were, and that something was going on, but they didn't know what. And then they read the next book and they go, oh, of course, okay, that's what was happening. And then she'd be texting as well. So that's what connected the stories. And it gave me, it always gave me a book that I could drive traffic to, so I could rotate through my my promotional schedule. I didn't want to have to always be focusing on book one. So this is how I launched the first series. And also I hired, right away, I hired a professional deranged doctor design to do the covers. They do excellent covers. And I really wanted it to look like a family, so that when you take a peek at that, you can tell that they belong together. I wanted to have consistency of look and feel, so I provided a creative brief, and I suggest you put together a creative brief when you're talking to your designers about how you want your covers to look. What kind of a feel, like I come up with emotions that I want the reader to feel, and I give those emotions to the designer. I don't get very specific. I don't say, like, she needs to be wearing a black tank top, she needs to have this. I usually leave that up to them, and they're good at it. And then,
what's an example of your creative brief? What are a few things you'd put on there?
So I would put a synopsis of the story that's not very long, but it would be also how old they are, what their life experience has been up to this point, whether they're orphans or they have parents, or they have any hobbies or strange tics or eccentricities. I would say the mood needs to be darker or lighter. The background, I mean, she's going to Japan, so I'd love to have a temple or something that speaks to Japan. What else? Being YA, of course, they have to be on the younger side. Sometimes you have to be careful with how they appear. Like instant gut reaction to how old they are. She is older. I don't know if you thought that when you saw her. She's a character that these girls are 17. She's 19. But if anybody does want a creative brief outline, I'd be happy to email it to you if you think that'd be helpful. If you want, you can flip it to the next one. This is the Laura Sarin covers. So obviously similar, like creating a brand, always being consistent. And this, I don't know if you remember when you saw Martha's cover, this disc was on her covers as well. So all of the Laura Sarin books have that. It's the one kind of linking factor to the reader to understand that they belong together, even though the covers are very different. So when I launched, if you want, you can, go to the next one. I did it very basically. This is just a screenshot of my homepage. There's a wonderful podcaster here called named Joanna Penn. I'm sure you guys know of her. She did a wonderful video that basically was something like how to build a website in 30 minutes or something like that. I sat and watched that, and I did what she said. So and this is what I ended up with. Obviously, it's not my whole website. It's just the cover, but very basic. Like I put it together myself. It didn't take me very much time, so you don't need to spend a lot of money doing it. Deranged Doctor, the guys that did my covers, came up with the graphics, and they knew exactly what I needed. They were just like, hey, you need a background piece, you need a header, you need, Facebook header, that kind of stuff. They just provided a little package. It didn't cost me a ton of money. And spent a bit of time putting this together. I did not have Join Abby Street Team, no Kindle. I didn't have privacy policy. When I first started out, it was very basic. It was at home. It was like basically about, contact, and I think I had books. Now I have Street Team, and I also had this giveaway. Just wanted to talk actually a little bit about novellas, because this little novella has really done well for me in many different ways. So it links into the series. The story is actually about one of the girls' mothers. It's a mermaid story. And I wrote this novella. It was only 24,000 or 25,000 words. And that's what I actually launched with on Amazon, just because I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I just have to get my author page up and running, so I'm just gonna stick it up on Amazon and see what happens. I put it up for 99 cents. I did not put it in KU because I wanted to use it on my website to give away and start building up my email subscribers. And then I wrote a part 2, and that came useful a little bit later. So the novella, I put it up on Insta-Freebie and was giving it away and gathering names that way. And this little guy has probably gathered 10,000 names over its lifetime, which it's not even doing anything at the moment. It's I repurposed it into a box set, which hit the USA Today seller list like 2 weeks ago. So there's another thing that you can use your novellas for. I'm a big fan of novellas. So yeah, I had it up on Amazon, selling it for 99 cents, giving it away on my website, giving it away on Insta-Freebie. By the time I launched my first book, I had 2,500 people on my newsletter list. And also, if you want to go back for a second to the screen before this one. Yeah. So by the time I launched, I had the novella written. I had this book ready to go, and this book was in final editing. This one was half done. So my first entire year was just spent preparing things to launch, preparing books to launch. So I launched this guy right after putting up the novella, and of course it didn't do a whole lot because it was all by itself and I didn't have anyone to tell. Then I put this guy up on Insta-Freebie. So I didn't publish her. I put her up on Insta-Freebie for 2 weeks, and she gathered 2,500 names for me. So then I had people to tell. And by the time I took her off of Insta-Freebie and then launched her, I had a list to tell Born of Water about, if that makes sense. And so then I had 3 things published. I had the novella, and I had these 2 books. And if you want to go forward to the one after here, that's what happened. So this is where I just had the novella up and the Born of Water, the first book. This is what happened. So I was gathering, I put Born of Fire up on Insta-Freebie, and I'm gathering names. My novella as well as gathering names. And then this is when I launched Born of Fire, and I told those people about Born of Water. And my goal, this has never gone it's kind of just held steady or grown. So my goal was, for those of you who like numbers, was $500 in sales between January 9th and January 31st, because that was when I launched Born of Fire. But Born of Water made $1,329 between January 9th and 31st, and Born of Fire made $576, and the novella made about $45. So altogether, about $2,000 came together from what I did. I also did I did lots of cross promotions. I was on Facebook. There's several groups on Facebook that I'd recommend joining. OTOH books, like Rebecca Hamilton's group, if you're doing fantasy and urban fantasy or epic. There's a list I think I've provided for you guys in the packet. So the bookings, I didn't do any MS ads or any Facebook ads for the first 6 months of my publishing career. I was just a little bit nervous to touch them, and I didn't understand quite as well how they worked. So I just relied on those third-party newsletter groups, which I've given you the list of as well. So the bookings, what I did here with the Born of Fire launch was I put water up for the 5 days free KDP promotion. And then I promoted it with a handful of the third-party newsletters. So Free Booksy, E-Reader Cafe, BK Nights, Just Kindle Books, eBook Hounds, E-Reader IQ, Readers in the Know, The Books Machine, and Many Books. Those are the ones I used, and then that's what happened. So now I have found that worked quite well. Just using those third-party newsletters and doing 5 days free, and I'd cycle through my books, do one promotion a month. And I would spend anywhere between $400 and $500 on each promotion. Every single time day 5 hit of my promotion, I'd get a sales spike that would last about 2 weeks. And that consistently happened until about 6 months ago, 5 months ago. And it stopped working as well. And I'm not sure why that is, but my best guess is that I have saturated, there's not that many people that you can access, in compared to Facebook where you've got access to millions, right? There's not as many people you can access through those third-party newsletters. So I think use them very strategically, because I think you have kind of a couple powerful hits with them, and then they start to fade. Their efficacy starts to fade. So I actually don't do them very much anymore. I now have transitioned over to learning AMS and Facebook and signed up for Mark Dawson's course, and it's been fantastic and everything. So the other thing that I recommend is looking at your launch schedule and strategically using what you have to launch something fairly frequently without exhausting yourself as a writer. So I had those 2 books ready to go, full of novels. I had the novella ready to go. Then I would launch another novella, but while I'm writing the next full novel, launch the novel. Then I put those first 3 books into a box set. It was books 1 through 3. So I had a launch the following month, but I didn't have to do any extra work. Then I took my novella and I put it into a box set with a group of authors, like an anthology. So I had another launch to talk about, but I didn't have to do any extra work. I'm saving my wrists and, buying myself time to produce my next story. So that was really helpful as well. For those of you who are interested in the ranking, I'm sure there's numbers of people here. Board of Water's ranking on December 19th was 94,154. On January 13th, which is the day that, I think is the day after Born on Fire went live, was 23,509. And then on the 18th, by the time we were here, it was 5,004. And that's not even the book I was launching, that's the book I was promoting. So does that make sense? I'm sorry if it's a bit confusing. Please stop and ask me if there's something that isn't clear. So let's see. Yeah, so 5-day free ad stacking works for me for probably 6 months, and then I started to have to transition. So I don't know what your experience has been with that, but I recommend using it strategically with your stories. The other thing I wanted to share with you was, if you want to look, and this is my last slide, I'm sort of homing in on the end. This is one of my favorite witticisms or quotes. You have roughly 100,000 times more synapses in your brain than you have sensory receptors in your body. Thus, you're roughly 100,000 times better equipped to experience a world that does not exist than a world that does. I highly recommend a couple of courses that I took, which really accelerated my growth as a creative. One, and they're both screenwriting courses, but honestly, they were so fantastic. I mean, screenwriting is just another way of storytelling. One is, sorry, I have it written down here, the Story Seminar by Robert McKee. Have you guys, it? Yeah. It's fantastic. And the other one is called Beyond Structure by David Freeman. And I'll give you two tidbits that I pulled from those that really helped me in my writing process. The Beyond Structure one by David Freeman, he talks about how to create a memorable character. And he breaks it down through something he calls a character diamond. So when you're developing your character, actually I'll list 3 traits, and maybe somebody in the audience can tell me who I'm talking about. It's one of the most beloved and famous fictional characters of all time. So I'll give you 3 traits, and if you can tell me, then David Freeman's just proven right. Genius, drug addict. I didn't even need to do 3! So yeah, genius, drug addict, and socially awkward. 3 traits that you wouldn't necessarily find or expect to find in one person. They're very divergent from one another, and yet they're found in one man. And those 3 traits make him so memorable and flawed. And if you think about the opposite of that, if you say you have a thug who's big, stupid, and mean, you just have a cliche. The same kind of thug character that you would have had, you can find in millions of books and movies. But if you use that character diamond to create a character that has divergent qualities, you're creating somebody who's so dimensional and so interesting. Like, think of Tony Soprano, who's a murderer and also a great dad. How do you put those two things together in the same person? So that was something that was really valuable in the Beyond Structure workshop, and highly recommend taking it. It's 2 days, and you end up analyzing screenplays and learning so much about stories and how characters have masks that they put up that you have to repeatedly hit for them to fall away by the end of the story. And the other, the Story Seminar by Robert McKee, one of the more valuable things that I learned there was when I'm looking at a scene that I've just written, I assign either a positive charge or a negative charge to the beginning of that scene. So what's happening in that scene? Are the emotions running high? Is it really tense? Did someone just die? Is someone falling in love? So I assign it with a positive or a negative charge, and then as the scene goes on, I assign a positive or a negative charge to the end of the scene. And there always needs to be a change. So you can either go from positive to negative, negative to positive, or you can go from negative to more negative, positive to more positive. As long as your energy and your tension is changing, then you are pulling the reader through the story rather than kind of pushing them, if that makes sense. Yeah.
What would you say is the right arc, the right or the best, I don't even know, the proper arc for a story? So can you go from positive to more positive and then to more positive, or do you go from negative to positive to very positive, or from negative to more negative to positive?
That's a good question. I think when I'm using that positive or negative charge, I'm applying it to scenes more than I am to the entire story. Yeah, so your story is going to follow most stories follow a typical 3-act structure where you're going through the first act, third act, first, second act, third act, and you are hitting like an inciting incident, your key events, your main character gets pulled into the story through no fault of their own. They have to make a decision to respond to what's happening, and usually they're in reactive mode up until somewhere around the end of the second act, which is when they start to take things back, take control, they go into proactive mode, builds to a climax. But when you're talking about individual scenes, that's where this positive negative charge comes in really handy. And I think if you go from a scene that's negative to negative, and then you start that scene negative and you go to negative, I think you will make people respond emotionally in a way that you don't want if you continue to follow that vein. So I think you need to fluctuate up and down, no more than kind of 2 in one direction, if that makes sense. So you've done something in the story that makes people upset or makes them want to cry. Then something at the end of that chapter, think that the character gets even more trouble. Then you have in the next scene even more trouble. At a certain point, they're going to actually laugh. They're going to respond in a way that you don't want because you stretch that tension a little bit too long. So that's my recommendation, if that helps, to try and keep it positive, negative in a nice flowing way. Yes.
How often do you send out your newsletters, and what is your launch frequency now?
My launch frequency is still, it's around once a month to once every 5 weeks, but I am going to slow that down a little bit. Now that I've got, I'm working on the 9th full book, and I feel like I've got a lot to play with in terms of promotions. My newsletter list I send out to a minimum of once a month, but more often twice. I have 2 Facebook groups. One is just an AL Knorr Facebook fan page that you can follow at any time that I make posts to that's not as interactive. And then I have the private group, which readers have to answer 3 questions to get into, and it's called the VIP Reader Lounge. And it's like a really fun place to hang out because they've read all the books and they love to interact with me there, and I love to interact with them. So they answer the questions of like, which was your favorite story? If you could be an elemental, what would you be? What's your dream job? I see that they've answered them. They're engaged already. I let them in, and then they have threads they can fill out, like who they are, make an introduction, all that kind of thing. Think about a time.
All right, thank you, Abby.